Well, let's bring in Political Analyst Asanda Ngoasheng to weigh in on the ANC Manifesto set to be launched this weekend in KwaZulu-Natal. Asanda, good afternoon. Thanks for your time with the SABC at this hour.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
And with everything coming to the fore, the location that the ANC has chosen to launch, given the public appeals, some of the internal issues that they've had to overcome in the last few days, what are you observing as KZN has now become the battleground for the national elections?
Well, I think, KZN has always been the battleground for national elections. KZN and its role or its size in the South African body politic is exactly the reason why Jacob Zuma managed to have the kind of political career that he had, because he seemed at the time to be seen to have an ability to bring together the people of KZN who at the time were fighting IFP versus ANC and various other kind of factions. And so it's not surprising that it's become the battleground yet again, particularly in this era where we're seeing Jacob Zuma also now trying to branch out of the ANC into the MK. And it's going to be interesting to see how these politics play themselves out. We've got the EFF who's vying and trying to get, or show a force essentially in KZN. You've got the MK who also will be doing the same and has been doing the same. And now you've got the ANC now launching their manifesto there as well, almost as its own measure of its own support. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this pans out in 2024 on the actual election day, when people actually have to make the decision of making their mark near the political party that they think is best to govern them.
Well, speaking of the ANC's advantage in terms of size and also its campaigning machinery, looking at the issue of squaring off against other parties like the MK party, the IFP that's gaining traction, the EFF as well. What are you observing on that front in understanding the issues of KZN rather in particular?
Well, I think, the IFP is a party, a political party that is I would say, a dying party in the sense that for the longest time, it was firmly entrenched in KZN area and seemed to have quite a large following, but over the years it has been on a slow decline. And then you've got the ANC, which at some stage became really popular, but also started its own decline. And then you've got the EFF, which has been growing in small numbers across the different provinces where others used to have their stronghold. And then you also have the NFP, which is a breakaway party of the IFP itself. And so there are, each political party is trying to showcase how it is different to the other. But what I think it comes down to is it will be the political party that is best able to demonstrate its understanding of the very specific politics of KZN. We know that KZN, for example, is one part of the country that has been most badly hit by climate change. We've seen flood after flood. We've seen disaster after disaster. And unfortunately, the ANC government has been unable to deliver services and to help people reconstruct their lives after the floods that have occurred, over various instances in KZN. We also know that this is the same KZN that has in eThekwini that had Zanele, who was voted in to be, a leader in the ANC, even though she was embroiled in corruption, which saw money, which was meant to be going to managing the very disasters that KZN people keep, seeing now. That money was allegedly taken by her and her comrades, starting with the waste management project that seemed to have some issues, and then some disaster funding, which also there were allegations around that. And so the ANC is not coming off on a positive note. It's coming off on quite a negative note, in that the people of KZN have many times expressed their dissatisfaction with the leadership of the ANC and their inability to rein in their corrupt comrades who have made life a living hell for the people of KZN. However, having said that, there is a sense that I feel in which the MK has actually in some ways had the opposite effect, in that I feel, whereas Jacob Zuma had the idea that the MK was going to cut the support in KZN and bring a lot of people towards him and away from the ANC, I actually feel that in some ways the MK has had the opposite effect, in that I feel it's revived some people's interest in the ANC and has seen people wanting to defend the ANC from these new interlopers who are claiming what effectively used to be the military arm or military wing of the ANC until the MK was disbanded a couple of years ago.
So on the back of the issues that you cited, youth unemployment, issues of corruption, lack of prosecution, climate change and disaster, amongst some of the issues found in KZN, will the ANC be replaying on some of its past glories over the past 30 years? Are there concerns that at this point they might be making populist promises to win votes? What are you observing ahead of Saturday's manifesto launch?
Well, I'm saying that, the ANC is doing the usual song and dance and kind of reminding people of what they've done over the past 30 years. And of course, this is stock standard ANC election, campaigning, where they remind people of where South Africa used to be. And in particular, KZN, remember, it was a province marred in violence just before the 1994 elections. And so it's one province that really did change post-democracy. But the question always remains that, how much did it change? Because KZN is to this day known as one of the provinces with the highest amount of political violence. You're most likely to be killed as a councillor or some kind of political leader in KZN than you are in any other part of the country. So being a politician in KZN is actually a very unsafe state of being, or an unsafe job, unlike other parts of the country where we are seeing increasing political violence, but not at the level that KZN has shown. And it's going to be the ANC's ability to convince people that they are cleaning up. And I think that's why we've seen, action around Sodi. We've seen action around various individuals who have been identified as being part of a wide ring of corruption, and their names have suddenly been now linked to efforts to clean up, efforts to bring cases to court, etc., etc. So I think that's why we've been seeing such actions, because the ANC is really trying to convince voters that it is dealing with corruption and that it is not going to allow people to get away with the crimes, particularly those of the state capture era.
Asanda, as we wrap up, just moving from the issue of political violence to perhaps looking at the issue of racialized inequality, how is the ANC able to mobilize itself on that issue? And if we look at the expectations about the stadium, Moses Mabhida Stadium, its capacity and the ANC filling it up compared to some of the other parties that have had their launches, what are you expecting on that front as you paint the picture ahead of Saturday?
Well, I don't think that, the ANC is a political party that struggles much to bring people to stadia or to places where it has its events. The reason why the ANC continues to win the election and gain the majority is because it remains, despite the corruption and despite everything that everyone says against it, it remains the choice of the majority of the people of South Africa. And that's likely to be the case until at least maybe 2029, where I think we're likely to see quite a high drop in its support. I do think coming up, in 2024, it's likely to drop support a little bit, but I think they still are able to get the numbers out there. And as I said, one of the unintended consequences, I think, of the MK party is that they've revived, even those people are like, I'm not so sure. People now are like, we're going to go and defend the ANC. We need to have a strong showing of force. And also the fact that the EFF already had their event is going to ensure that those who are members of the ANC and who don't want the ANC to be embarrassed by having a lack of numbers are going to show up in their numbers. And so it's quite an interesting race that's happening in KZN. But, of course, as with all of these things, it's going to be the vote on that, on that 29th of May that's going to tell us what the people of KZN really think. At this point, it's just politicians making promises, and we're yet to see whether people believe those promises or won't believe those promises.
Thank you very much for your time on the SABC at this hour. Leave the conversation there. Asanda Ngoasheng, political analyst, weighing in ahead of the ANC's Manifesto launch, set to take place at the Moses Mabhida Stadium in KZN. We're looking at the location. We're looking at some of the public appeals and even just the dynamics internally unfolding that the ANC have had to deal with over the past few days. Of course, just looking at how that is going to impact the road to elections as we await elections to obviously come. We know that the date set for the 29th of May 2024 yet to be proclaimed. Obviously looking at all those chess moves happening as we edge closer.